All right, so one of the most frustrating aspects from the entire Trump era has been this constant push to rehabilitate the reputations of Bush era Republicans and like Bush/Reagan style Republicans in an effort to sort of paint them as if Trump is some aberration from the Republican Party and he's not a real representation of the noble and compassionate conservatives. And this is all bullshit. We know that this is bullshit because Donald Trump represents the same exact corrupt, militarized agenda that the same Bush era or Reagan era Republicans represent. The real difference between Bush and Trump isn't really on policy. The main difference is in their rhetorical style, and Donald Trump frequently says the quiet part out loud and kind of exposes Republicans and the agenda that they're actually running on, and a lot of these establishment types didn't like that, and so they've cast blame on purely Donald Trump for problems that they actually helped create. And I have a clip that perfectly is emblematic of this entire situation because it's George W. Bush. Okay, George W. Bush claiming he is the perfect example of a so-called compassionate conservative. Okay, so let's go ahead and listen to this interview, and then we're going to talk about the many reasons why this is completely absurd and ridiculous and really laughable that somebody like George W. Bush is saying this.
You ran as a compassionate conservative.
I did.
Do you believe there are compassionate conservatives today?
Absolutely, I'm one. And I think there are a lot. The problem is, with an angry society, it's hard to punch through with compassion.
Is it an angry society, or is it certain leaders and people who've stoked that anger and fear?
I think that's an interesting question. I'm a big leadership guy, and so therefore I think maybe the latter part of your question is true, that people stoke anger in order to advance their apolitical agenda. I do believe there is a more, my dad spoke kinder and gentler, and he truly believed it, and I believed in unifier, not divider, and they just can't be empty slogans. You have to believe it in order to be credible. I think that, yes, it's going to require leadership to help heal wounds.
Okay, so this is laughable for many reasons that should be obvious. I mean, I'm assuming if you watch my videos, you're already not a big fan of George W. Bush, and there's plenty of reasons to hate George W. Bush that we can get into. But the first thing that stood out to me is his total refusal to take responsibility for anything that he did as the most powerful person in the planet for 8 years. I mean, he blames the angry society, right? He blames leaders, and he's alluding to, obviously, Donald Trump, angry leaders in an angry society that just are making it difficult for these pure of heart lawmakers to do their job in unifying the country. That's the type of picture that he is trying to portray of himself. And really the first point, even before that, should be, what the fuck is this interview? What is this journalist, this so-called journalist, doing in this interview asking somebody like George Bush this type of question with absolutely no pushback? You are going to allow George W. Bush, a war criminal, to call himself a compassionate person, a compassionate conservative? So there's so many different things that we can talk about here. But the first thing that stood out to me, again, is the fact that he's just not willing to take responsibility for anything that he does. I mean, you're going to talk about an angry society, but then you're not going to talk about the fact that you allowed the '08 financial crisis to explode under your watch. You allowed the economy to tank under your watch, and then people didn't get the assistance that they needed to make it through that crisis. You want to talk about an angry society? You launched illegal wars against countries that didn't attack us, that led to, and you lied about those wars, by the way. You lied to the American people. You lied to the world about the justifications to get us, for example, into the Iraq war. You lied about the weapons of mass destruction. You lied us into a war that led to hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of civilian casualties and deaths. So what the fuck are you talking about, angry society? You are the textbook definition of somebody who brings about an angry society, and a lot of that anger is justified. But again, he's just totally unwilling to take responsibility for any of the things that he did throughout his administration. And again, the list of the things that he's done throughout his administration that would lead you to believe that he is an utter failure of a compassionate human being are endless. I mean, endless. We could talk about his handling of Katrina, right? And the similarities between that and how Ted Cruz sort of handled the recent disaster in Texas when he fled town and went on vacation. George W. Bush was on vacation for the lead up to Katrina and the aftermath of it and his handling of it. I mean, this guy is not compassionate if the word compassion is to have any meaning whatsoever, then it cannot be applied to somebody like George Bush. And I know, again, that the word war criminal gets thrown around, especially like leftists, by leftists. But if the word war criminal is to have any meaning, then yes, that applies to George W. Bush. This is a guy who, again, attacked a country illegally that didn't attack us, and occupied, invaded them, and the sanctions as well, that ended up killing hundreds of thousands of people. Okay, this man is a war criminal. His CIA operated black sites where they tortured people, in many cases innocent people, where they were doing torture on behalf of the United States. This man is a war criminal. How are you going to call him compassionate? I mean, it's just absolutely ridiculous. And then the final point, which is the real overarching point that I want to make here, is George Bush is kind of right in a sense, because he's not right that he's compassionate. He's not right that he's a compassionate conservative. He's not right that he is on the policy different from Donald Trump in any substantive way. But the one area that he is right is this is exactly what they mean when they try to sell you on the idea of compassionate conservatives, or the idea that the Republican Party before Donald Trump showed up was some sort of a noble party. It wasn't. They were doing the same goddamn shit, if anything, to a worse degree, as Donald Trump was, and they just weren't saying the quiet part out loud in a lot of these circumstances. In fact, not only were they not saying the quiet part out loud, but they were fucking lying to our faces in order to get us into some of the endless wars that we're still in today. Okay, so the idea that he is a compassionate conservative is absolutely ridiculous, but it's also accurate, because this is exactly what they mean. So whenever you see these Republicans that are trying to rehabilitate their own images, as was the case with things like the Lincoln Project, if you remember, which has spectacularly imploded recently, but like with the Lincoln Project, how many shows on CNN and MSNBC and all of these outlets were they invited on? These people who participated in the same destruction, this type of destruction that was led on by people like George Bush. And they just invite them on as if they never did anything, as if Trump is this new aberration that's totally different from the rest of them. They represent the exact same evil and corruption, okay, that Donald Trump does, just in a different style, rhetorically, and that's really the biggest difference. So those are the main points I want you to get from this. Absolutely laughable for George Bush to be calling himself a compassionate conservative. Pathetic job from the journalists. But again, the main point of this is, remember, this is exactly what they mean. When they talk about pre-Trump Republicans being some sort of noble example of conservatism, this is what the fuck they mean. They mean literal war criminals, corrupt as hell war criminals like George W. Bush.